Okay, good evening. This talk's going to be in English. I hope that's okay. My French is terrible. My German's okay, but so my name is Oona Horx-Strathern, and I'm Irish, but I live in Vienna. And I've been working with trend and future research for like the last 25 years. Makes me feel really old when I say that, but so what we've been doing over the last 25 years is looking at how we will live and work and build for the future. And about 10 years ago, I thought, I've done a lot of theory, how about a bit of practice? And I decided to build a future house in Vienna with my husband as part of our work, if you like. And I asked my husband, I said, before we started building, I said, how should our future house look? How do you imagine it? And he showed me a picture. He showed me this, which somehow I think is a very male idea of living in the future. He also gave me some pictures of the interior, which, I wasn't sure about that. I thought this might be a bit of a mess in the in the bedroom to have a big thing like that. He was a great fan of, or is a great fan of 2001. And I said, okay, well, I'd like to live in the future in an old castle. That's my heritage. It's not my castle. And then we said, okay, well, maybe we can find a compromise. We can use all our knowledge that we've built up over the years. And we built a future house. And there's a lot of things about it that aren't very futuristic, but it actually has proven to be, I'll show you some more pictures later, and explain a bit more. But effectively, it became the perfect place during the COVID lockdown. So in a way, we kind of predicted something maybe. One of the things in designing this house is we realized we had to really think about the social demographic changes, how we really want to live with our family in the future, with each other in the future. And we have to really think about what's the zeitgeist, what Mies van der Rohe called the will of the age. And in our work over the last 25 years, we've always been looking for whatever branch we work with, whether it's politics, banks, interior design, building. We use the megatrends. And the megatrends are basically the big social demographic changes in our society. And this is a map which represents all 12 of them. I know it's a little hard to see, but I'm happy to send it to anyone or you can find it on the internet in English and German. And it shows how all the big changes in our lives, how the big megatrends, which will affect us probably for the next maybe 180 years, how they all interact, how they all work together, how out of the connection of these trends, new trends appear. And all of these trends have an effect on how we will live, how we'll work, how we'll build. Some of them more than others, and what's happened during the COVID crisis has also that the shift has changed a bit. Here you can see how the urbanization trend and the mobility trend has created the bike boom, for example. But this is a map that is quite useful for thinking, if you're a company or a developer and you're thinking, which trends have I forgotten about? Which ones do I need to concentrate more on? Which ones are the trends that I'm working with connected to? And all of these trends are having an effect on how we will build for the future. I'll talk about a couple of them in a bit more depth because they're the ones which I think are most important at the moment, especially now with our new perspective on living and on cities. One of the things we often forget about trends is that a trend creates a counter-trend. So a trend is like a disturbance, if you like, in society, and it creates anti-trends or counter-trends. It's what we call the recursion principle. Think of it, for example, with globalization and localization. We have a trend to glocalization. So we see a trend like globalization. The counter trend is we want more local products. And then we find there's a synthesis that comes out of it. And the synthesis in that case would be the glocalization trend. Or, even in your own life, think there's a lot of people who have become vegan. There are a lot of people who just want to eat meat. And then you have the flexitarians. If you like, that's trend, counter-trend, and synthesis again. So it works on lots of levels. So all of these trends, these big mega trends, if you like, trickle down to our homes, to our home trends. Some of them are these kind of syntheses. Some of them are trends which are just appearing and shifting and changing. Trends are never linear. That's what you have to remember. Trends will always create a counter trend, even in our homes. I think, first of all, we need to think a little bit about, when we think about how we're going to live in the future, we have to think a little bit about, for me, I would say two of the main social demographic trends which are important is the aging society, that we're living longer. So we have different expectations. We need to, because we're living longer, we need to build homes for maybe different phases of our life. Because we're living longer, we have more phases. I mean, here in Luxembourg, you have a great life expectancy. Men till 80, women till 84. I think if only a bit higher in Switzerland, so you have to move to Switzerland if you want to live longer. Or, in fact, if you're a man and you're married, you'll probably live 2 years longer. And if you're a woman who's married, 2 years less. Just saying, So if you're single, think about it. But, we're living much longer, so we're going to think about what do we want as we get older. Now, what's happening as we're getting older is we're trying to stay younger for longer. Each generation is about 7.5 years younger than the last generation, mentally and physically. So that means you are physically and mentally about 15 years younger than your grandparents. You have a completely different lifestyle. And you can see that, in advertising, you can see it in the self-image of older people, how they want to live in the future. They don't want to live in a normal old people's home. They want to be out on their motorbikes. They want to be out and about. I mean, when you look at pictures of older people today in the media, they tend to act like teenagers. Along with this, so we have a much longer aging society, but we also have now a very individualistic society. We call it the megatrend individualization. One of the things where we notice that is the increase in single households. I'm not sure what the statistics are here in Luxembourg, but maybe someone can tell me, but there are a lot of cities where we have about 40 to 50% single households. And that's one of the results of this individualization trend, which means we have to build for different demographics. We can't build for big families anymore. We need to build more for single people. And one of the results of this, of course, is a health problem, a mental health problem. We talk a lot about loneliness now because of the crisis, but it was a taboo theme for a long time. And I believe now we're really starting to look at the effect of a lot of people who are living on their own. It's not, you can live alone and be very happy. That's not the problem. It's the social isolation. So we have to find ways, if we build in the future, how are we going to build so people aren't so isolated? They still want their privacy, they still want their personal space, but they need more connectivity to other people. I mean, one of the things we often think about when we talk about loneliness, we think automatically of older people living alone. But what we've really learned during this crisis and in the last years with increased digitalization is that it's a lot to do with younger people too. Surprisingly, younger people, even if they appear to be more connected with their mobile technology, social media, they're actually getting a problem with loneliness. So some cities and some governments are coming up with ideas to solve this in the housing field. There's this wonderful example I want to show you from Helsingborg in Sweden. Sweden has a very high percentage of single households. I think they have something like 60%. People move out of home as soon as they finish school, have a lot of older people living alone, especially women, because women live longer, the men have died, so there's a lot more older women. And in Helsingborg, they realized there were a lot of very lonely older people and younger people. And they said, what can we do about this? Can we combine it? And they created something called Salbo Living, which is a combination of companionship and living in the name. I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but maybe someone who's Swedish here could help me. Anyway, so what they did was they said, we're going to bring people under 25 years old and people over 65 or maybe 70, around that, together. So people who've retired and people under 25. And only people in these age groups can live there. And what they did was they picked people in, they built an apartment block with 72 different apartments, complete diversity of people. And in their rental contract, it said the one thing they have to do is that they have to spend 2 hours each week with each other. Otherwise, they get thrown out. And they found that it was really successful. It was a really interesting social experiment. So I think we're looking at different models for building in the future. This is a model from Vienna. And this is a wonderful example of what I showed earlier, this recursion, trend and counter-trend. It's what we call an individualistic community. And that sounds like a paradox, or it sounds like a contradiction. But in fact, it's a very good way of combining the needs for individualism and the need for community. And they built it on the principle of a village. They call it the vertical village. That's what they call it, sort of within the house. And they worked around the principles of neighborhood. How can we create neighborhood through the design? How can we encourage cooperation? How can we encourage community? And the key was obviously diversity, and they want to make it a safe environment, the same feeling as you would have in a village. So they have 39 apartments. Their apartments are on average quite small, but people don't need an extra guest room. They don't need a gym for themselves because they have all these functions which they share with other people. So they have access to a sauna, to a library, to a cafe, to a working space. They don't need so much space for themselves individually. And we're starting to see a lot of these kind of living schemes. We're starting to see them throughout Germany, probably here too, a lot in Switzerland. And I think that's reflecting this trend that we see at the moment, that we're starting to choose our homes, not so much for how many square meters, but for how many shared meters, what we share with other people. So I would say that what we're starting to see is this shift in status, away from squared meters to shared meters. So maybe in the future we won't say, oh, I have an apartment that's 100 square meters. You'd say, well, I have 50 square meters, but I have a lot of other services that I can access. I have a lot of shared spaces I can use. So it's a shift in the status of how we think about how we want to use our space. And one of the interesting things you see is something often has to hold these communities together, has to create a kind of atmosphere, has to create a neighborhood. And in the old days, in a tower block or in a Wohnanlage, you know, a sort of apartment block, you would have a caretaker or a janitor, you know, a Hausmeister or a concierge. And nowadays you have what's called community managers. But in Sweden, I visited a project where they had a chief happiness officer, which I thought was a really nice title for someone who actually was actively trying to create a community. I think that could be a kind of good job description of the future. Certainly sounds better than a Hausmeister. So one of the big trends we've seen in the last years, partly as a result of increased prices, increased urbanization, and partly as a result of increased single households, is a trend towards micro-living. Or we also hear tiny homes, mini homes. I've heard skinny houses, or even mosquito living. That's very small. And I think it's a trend that has its advantages and its disadvantages. This is the smallest house I found. This one, this little box. It's called the Wanderbox. It's actually, you take your home with you, and you open it up, and You can fit a bike in, and you can fit your bed and your bedding. You can fit even a picture and some books. And you can fit a few clothes, and you can actually transport it. If you want to be ecological, you transport it like this. So this is the smallest home I found. It's literally, I think, 2 cubic meters. So we've seen a real, I mean, this is an extreme example, obviously, but it's still, it's an interesting idea, and I think the people who developed it thought it's an ecological way of living. It fits with our mobile lifestyle, the need for flexibility too. A lot of designers are starting to build micro-houses. This is from Muji, who you wouldn't really normally associate with homes. And this whole trend is moving towards, getting smaller and smaller, these apartments. It's what I call the shoebox syndrome. And it's a bit of a challenge, when it comes to our mental health. When sometimes you hear people talking about 6 square meter apartments. And that's what I call McLiving. I don't, if you ate McDonald's every day, you wouldn't be very healthy. And I think living in very tiny apartments, if they don't have any kind of shared spaces, if you're restricted just to that, ends up being mentally and physically very unhealthy. And even the neuroscientists are starting to kind of look at what the effect of living in small apartments has on people, on their mental health. And they often say it's not that we can't live in smaller homes, because many of us have to, but it's just harder to be happy in them. And they have to be well designed. One of the consequences of this sort of smaller living, and also because of our increased mobility, increased different life phases, is a trend that I call the tidyism trend, which is a bit of a funny word, but it's about how we're rethinking about our homes in terms of you could say tidying them up or getting a bit more order in them. And the reason that we're seeing this trend towards more different interior design in this idea of tidyism is because we are living in smaller spaces, we're moving a lot more, and also it's very hard in a lot of new built blocks to find storage space. You don't, all the top levels, they're all used now for apartments. Cellars tend to be used for garages. So we're having to think more and more about how we use the space that we have in our apartment. I mean, if you think about it, each of us own about 10,000 objects that, down to your every sock, every toothbrush, every, not maybe every paper clip, but if you go home and count your objects that you have, you might be surprised to find that you have around 10,000 on average, which seems like an awful lot. But where can we put them all? What can we do with them? And I think we all saw last year and the years before this big trend with Marie Kondo, and a lot of people who copied this trend were very successful. But it was interesting to see how people talked about Marie Kondo, because the whole thing about tidying up and keeping what you wanted in your apartment wasn't just to do with the physicality of it, it was to do with the mental health. And I think we're starting to focus more on that. And we will in the future, because as we've seen, as we've been in lockdown, we've had more time to think about our belongings, to think about what we really want to keep in our apartment and what we want to throw out. And all these objects are a reflection of our identity, of what we want to say about ourselves. And we've had now the time, most of us, in our apartments to really think about that. So one of the results of all these trends and tidyism and individualization come together in that we're starting to see many more smart storage solutions being offered. We're starting to see that people are relating to their furniture differently. It's what I call curated furniture. And we're starting to see a big increase in so-called hotels for things. So these self-storage spaces that we see on the high streets. Something called also status sentience. That basically means that we're starting to think less about the status to the outside, what we show off to other people. We're thinking more, when we think about our homes, status to the inside. So, as Mary Porter said, she said, instead of passively consuming designer furniture and getting the look, today we're looking for ways to bring status sentience, that means respect and care, into our homes. You can compare it to the fashion industry. So we're moving away from this kind of vacuous, very empty status symbols to a more deeper world of status sentience, a deeper world of meaning in our objects. So you might have noticed on the megatrend map, we have a megatrend connectivity. People, when they see megatrend connectivity, think, oh, yeah, that must be digitalization. Digitalization is a part of it, because digitalization is a tool. But megatrend connectivity is about a lot more than that. When we think about our homes, we often think, yeah, wouldn't it be great to have a smart home? Does anyone here have a smart home? Does anyone have everything controlled by an iPad? I think one of the things we really noticed over the last 6 months is that this big trend and this big push to digital devices, to the smart home, became less important. We weren't kind of running after these digital devices anymore. We learned that a smart home meant that we're connected more to people than to technology. There's actually a wonderful series of photos by a photographer, and what he did was he photographed people at home and he took away their devices to show what happens when people are too linked into their devices and they're not communicating, they're not connecting anymore to each other. They're just distracted. I think we've all experienced this at home. And the same could be said of digital assistants. The whole Alexa, Echo Dot, there was a really big push for that. And I'm not sure that something like Alexa and Echo Dot really was what helped us during lockdown. I don't think that it's having such an exponential increase in being sold. You know, we tested it also in our future house, because we said if we're going to live in a future house, we have to test all these things. I think it lasted a week, and then it got put in the cellar. Because what we realized is that we weren't connecting with each other. We were talking to the device. And a lot of psychologists and neuroscientists are starting to look at the behavior of people in homes with these devices. And they found that often people don't talk to their partner, they just talk to the device. So they'll wake up in the morning, and instead of asking their dear partner next to them in bed how the weather is, they'll ask Alexa. So this breaks communication. It's what we call technoference, where technology interferes with natural communication. You can also call it the Camilla syndrome, because it's like having a third person in the marriage. But yeah, that's not obviously an official term. That's what I call it. That's why ours is in the cellar at home. So one of the big trends we've seen this big trend to digitalization, and again we've seen the counter trend. What we've seen, and one doesn't mean that the other one doesn't exist, it just means that there is a balance forming. So in this digital age, we started to see a trend to analog, a trend to things that are authentic, a trend to real experiences. And this is really has a big influence on our homes and on design. Again, here you'll see we have the trend to digitalization, which is what we call online. Then we have the counter trend to offline, to analog things. And then we have the synthesis, and we call it online. And the idea with that is to say, how can we use our online technology to improve our offline lives? So we can find a synthesis, we can find a balance. And I think that's what we're starting to do in our homes. So another one of the effects of, also the lockdown, also the COVID crisis, also a counter trend partly to digitalization, to industrialization, to urbanization, is the trend to ecology. But we don't talk about ecology in the old sense of the term. We call it megatrend neo-ecology. So why do we call it that? What we're trying to do is get away from the old idea of ecology, which doesn't really fit into our consumer society. It doesn't really fit into our lifestyles today, where we enjoy being consumers. And the old idea of ecology, which we call green ecology, which we're in this very green ecological room by the look of it, but green ecology was so much, since the 60s, linked to us feeling guilty. So, if you consumed, you had to feel guilty about things. If you couldn't recycle them, you had to feel guilty. It was a lot to do with the fact that, we were told we were running out of resources, that the planet is going to, be apocalyptic scene by, in 50 years. So it created a lot of fear. And I think this message, if you're trying to, now in our society, in our culture today, we can't use this message if we're going to really encourage people to be ecological. We have to think differently. And we say we have to think in terms of blue ecology. And blue ecology is much more about beauty, you could say. It's not so much about the fact we have to use less. It's about abundance. It's about being guilt-free in consumerism. It's about being connected to ecology, but not feeling bad about it. It's about having courage to say, I can consume these things, but I don't have to feel bad because they are perhaps made with the cradle-to-cradle principle. We're starting to see a lot more products in many fields using this principle of cradle-to-cradle, and I think it will be much more important in the future. And the cradle-to-cradle principle is basically, as Michael Braungart, who kind of created this society, and he created this institute that has been developing products with this principle, it's basically a design framework for going beyond sustainability, and you're designing for abundance. So the idea is to say we have enough resources, we just have to use them better. We have to be able to put them back into the technological or into the ecological cycle without them losing any value. So you can make a product, but you can then take it apart and use the materials so that they don't lose any value. And there's a lot of companies working with this principle. This is the mirror chair by, what's it called? Herman Miller, I think, the chair. And the idea, it's based on the cradle-to-cradle principles. Also, the i3 electric car is built, I think, almost to 90%. You can build so that you can reuse all the elements and that you don't have any damaging chemicals in the walls or in the floors. Sofas, and even jeans. I'm not wearing them today, but I don't actually buy my jeans, I lease them. So it's a company called Mud Jeans, and you lease your jeans. You pay, I think it's something like €7 a month, and then when you get bored of them, you send them back, and they kind of break them down, and they make new jeans out of them, which is quite cool. So the idea is not so much about ownership in the future, maybe, about leasing products. And starting to really, in the building industry, it's just really starting, but this is a building in Sweden built with cross-laminated timber, and it has a 120-year lifespan, which is really long for a building, and all the elements are reusable, right down to even the screws that hold the wood together. The idea is that you'll be able to then, if you want, in 80, 100, whatever years, take everything apart and reuse them without losing in any value. Now you can see it a bit closer. And again, using CLT, cross-laminated timber and wood, is also, again, part of this trend back to ecology. And again, this whole trend to building in wood is what I would call a counter-trend to digitalization as well, because we spend so much time with our objects. And you see that in our homes. You see that walking through the halls here, there's a lot of wood. You see that a lot in the interior as well. So wood is one of the materials that I would call hero materials. And we're seeing a trend, definitely a trend towards these materials. Materials that are a counter-trend to digitalization, that are ecological, that give us another feeling about values, give us another feeling about what we really want to live with in our homes. So hero materials could be, for example, like the picture I showed you, I'll show you that in a minute, more detail. But just, I think what we're starting to learn in the last years is that it's much more important how every object in our home, what it's made of. We know and we understand more through psychologists, through neuroscientists, or just from watching ourselves, that it's getting more important, every object in our home, because it affects how we behave and how we feel. And so it really does matter. It's mattering ever more what these objects are made with and who made them and where they were made. So the picture I wanted to show you is quite a surprise, really. It's the first vegan hotel suite in the world. It's in the Hilton, which is, you know, you don't really think of the Hilton as working with vegan materials, but they've actually done this very beautiful vegan hotel suite in Bankside in London with Bombus & Parr, a design company. So they have no leather, no wool or feathers. They use Pinatex, cotton carpets, and the pillows are made of tree silk. So it's a completely, right down to, I think if you order room service, you can only order vegan food too. And I think it's interesting because you don't have to be a vegan to go and stay there. You don't have to, you know, wear certain things. But I think out of pure curiosity, it's an interesting place to visit, just to see what you can do with vegan products. There's even in Scotland a vegan hotel, so everything, all the furnishings, bedding, everything is vegan. It's actually also very nice design. And I was researching this subject, and I found a lot of interior designers now who say they can design a vegan home for you. So I think if we want to build more ecologically in the future, more effectively, I think we're going to have to start building more modular and mass-produced. And modular and mass-produced is a kind of phrase where everyone thinks back to the 60s. Remember these sort of ugly, well, I'm old enough to remember these ugly 60s blocks and these ugly 60s mass-produced prefabricated buildings. But it's really developed since then, and we have a lot of fantastic designer, modular, prefabricated buildings. And the great thing about them is that they save time, they save money, they disturb the environment less when they're put up, and you can create really interesting design. So like here, this is by Bjørk Ingels Group in Denmark. So modular pre-crafted, so you can put up a block like that within a couple of months. I think it has a great potential in very dense cities, also where prices are high, and they don't have to be ugly. I mean, this is a really nice design, very light. Also in England, there's a great company called Urban Splash, and they're doing a lot of social housing, but they're doing a lot of retail blocks, all sorts of different things. And their motto is everyone deserves great design. And the idea is it's affordable design. So here you can see how they're bringing it in with a crane. You can choose, what you want in each part of the module, and then it's all kind of popped together. And actually, really nice design. So one of the big things that we haven't talked about is new work, megatrend new work, because that will affect also our homes, especially now. I think over the last, 10, 20 years, we've seen a big conversion of lifestyles. So in the old days, very long time ago, before my time, home and work was very much separated, sort of industrial work. And over the last maybe 10, 15 years, with much more the gig economy, the flexible working times, we've seen a kind of melting of work and home spheres. And people have started to work in transit. They've started to work in third places, like co-working spaces. Because with the digital technology, people didn't want to be at home on their own, so people have gone to work in co-working spaces. I think Adam Neumann, the founder of WeWork, he said that co-working spaces were a place where people make a life, not just a living. So you can see that people needed that connectivity. They wanted to go there, not just to work, but to socialize, to meet people. But what's happened now? So everything's being kind of thrown up in the air, and what we've seen is a big shift to what I call the office, which is basically the melting of home and office. And I think we'll stick with this trend for quite a while. I think a lot of companies are now setting down the rules and the regulations so people will be able to work probably maybe 50, 80% at home in the future. Definitely for the next year, I would say. And then I think beyond that, people will get used to much more of working from their home offices, or their office, as I call it. So third places will become slightly less important, and working in transit and working in the office will become less important. And that will have an effect on our floor plans at home, because we've got to adapt. I don't know about you, but in the lockdown in Vienna, in our house, there were 6 of us suddenly, rather than normally 2, and I ended up working in the laundry room at one point because I needed some peace and quiet. So we've all found, I think, we've been able to adapt in some ways to working from home. And if we look at the evolution of floor plans over the years, it's really interesting. If you think of the classic industrial age architecture, everything was very separated out. The bedroom, the sitting room, the kitchen was for the wife, and then you had this kind of, sterile room, the bathroom. And then over the last sort of, 30 years, we had this modern living where everything got kind of melted together, where we tried to work in our kitchens, where the kids did the homework, where we had much more of a kind of open plan living. And when we built our future house, we decided to break that up. We found that quite stressful, the idea of having everything possible in every room. And we said, we're going to call our house the Future Evolution House. We're going to build it in a modular way so that we have 4 modules, which are then interchangeable and will adapt as we change, as the family changes. And so we have our 4 modules. The love module is the bath and the bedroom. The hub is where we kind of communicate, where the connectivity, the kind of human connectivity takes place. Then we have, what's called kin or guest, that's the children. My husband called it guest room, but I thought that was a bit mean. And then we have our home office module. And the idea was to get away from this open plan living to what we call broken plan, or where we have breakout spaces. And that worked really well. And I think now for our sort of office of the future, that will actually be a way that we can really find this balance between home and work. We have the space, so we're very lucky. I mean, the kids, when they were small, weren't so happy because they came home from school and the first thing they saw was the word homework, Hausaufgaben. They weren't so happy about that. A lot of people have found ways during lockdown. People are finding new ways to work at home, to find new offices. I found this quite amusing. People talked about their shed quarters. People who had any space of a garden started to put up a little garden shed to working, and I think these will get more and more creative. We'll find more and more interesting solutions for that. Tiny houses that will be put up in gardens, maybe in parks. Maybe you can rent one in a park. We can see that as a way of working in little isolated bubbles, maybe in these kind of places in the future. So you can still be in the green, but you can be in your personal office. And female ones obviously are called she sheds, which I think is quite nice, but there's already been quite a while a trend towards that. One of the things we can't ignore, of course, is the importance of a balcony. I think that will be a big building trend in the future. They will maybe take less square meters for their home so that they can afford a balcony. There was a very nice phrase someone said in an interview. They said what they really felt was a balcony makes a home free, because you're in this kind of semi-private public space, so you can connect with your neighbors, you can connect with the environment. It really is what we see also, what people are looking for now. If you look at the search engines, you look at what people are searching for in their homes, they're looking for balconies. That was really the place and the thing that really helped people, I think, during the crisis, and probably will be a big factor in the future. And I wonder whether, you know, something like a balcony could become like a basic right in a housing block. So I think what we're seeing generally is what I would call an upgrade in our homes. I think we're putting much more value, we're investing more now in our homes. We can't go on holiday anyway, so we're investing in our homes. And I think this will be a trend that will keep for quite a few years. And I call this trend home sweet home, because you know, when you go to a hotel and you just get an ordinary room, you think, actually, I'd quite like to be in a suite. You want this feeling of an upgrade. And people are investing in their homes. People are wanting to make their homes more livable. And this is what I call the home sweet home trend. Because in the end, the home is about our identity. And the more time we spend in them, the more we're learning about our homes and about ourselves. As someone said in one interview, they said, I'm starting to love my home more, but my home is starting to love me more as well, which I thought was quite nice. So we're starting to learn how we can bring together all these needs in the home. So needs for communication, for togetherness, for retreating, for working, or for selfness, you know, that time for ourselves. And we're learning a lot about it through Neuro Architecture. There's a lot of people who are studying what architecture does to our brains. Winston Churchill said, I mean, he wasn't a neuroscientist, obviously, but he said it very nicely. He said, we shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us. And that's what we're starting to learn more. The more time we spend in our homes, the more we think about them, the more we look at the objects, the more we can learn about this kind of the cycle of what effect, not just the building, but our furniture, the layout of our homes has on how we feel. What are we feeling? What are our emotions? And what can we do about it? And how does it affect our behavior? So everyone asks me, they say, but you know, when are we going back to normal? I say, we're not going back to normal. I think we're going to move forward to a new normal in our homes, and our homes will be greener, they'll be healthier, they'll be more flexible, and they'll be better connected, not just to our community, but I think, and I hope, to ourselves. Thank you very much for listening. If anyone has any questions or, you know, wants one of the charts to look at later, just give me your card and I'm happy to send it. Or you can, if you have any questions that you suddenly think you want to ask, or you saw an example that you'd like some more information about, that's my email address, and you can easily find me on the internet if you lose it. Thank you very much. Oh, a question.
Good afternoon. One question. Do you think this study, is it the same? Because you show us a lot of information regarding the Scandinavian countries. They have another philosophy. When you're looking, for example, French people, German people, Italian people, the philosophy is different, for example. And do you think this kind of new home could be also present in Italy, in France, where the philosophy is different or not?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, already we've seen in the last years a big trend to Scandinavian design. We've all been talking about hygge, and it's become a kind of byword for rethinking about your home and how you want to live. And I think it's not a coincidence that we're starting to look towards the Scandinavian countries. They have a different approach to living. They have a very different approach to work-life balance. And I think, you know, we can always learn by example from other countries for how they do it.
And for the Scandinavian, I know, for example, in the family, they have a lot of policy agreement to put really the people within the family. When, for example, they have new kids, the men have to take the 6 months of father, but the policies, the government is helping a lot. Do you think our government would also help? Do they have help, for example, for the home? Are there special governments, new laws, new financial helps?
I'm not sure. I mean, I know they have quite a lot of, they have a good social housing policy. They have good social housing that's available. Yeah, especially in terms of the work-life balance. I mean, I know in Scandinavia, if you stay at the office longer than 5 o'clock, they think there's something wrong with you, you know, so you're supposed to go home. I think we can learn something from the attitude. I think the government does have a good approach to their building policy, but they also have the problems in Stockholm because they have a lot of single homes. They have a lot of single households. And already now they're starting to try, when they build new housing estates, to try and create spaces where you have community. And like the example of the chief happiness officer, that was she works in a co-living space, which is an old hotel that's been converted. And it's not just popular for students, it's also younger families who want to live there because they want the diversity. They're only starting there now as well with these schemes, but you see them, especially in Germany, popping up a lot more. And I think obviously it has a lot to do with, you know, government policy, but I think, you know, governments are starting. There's a lot of networks of governments, like the Parliament of Mayors, where all the Bürgermeister or the mayors swap ideas about these kind of things, and they learn from each other, and then they can influence policy in their own country.
Thank you. Thank you.
So our connectivity over smartphone and PC make it more distance from us. How you?
I think it's you have the trend and the counter trend. So it's connecting us, but it's also disconnecting us. I think that's what I was trying to say.
Okay, so it's more important to have to put the smartphone on the side and to have more student living. So it's shared room and everyone has his little room for sleeping and.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can learn to balance it. I think, you know, like with a lot of technology, when it first comes, we're all very excited about it and everybody has it. And then we have to learn the social etiquette or the social techniques to deal with it. So, you know, it's like when we first had the cars on the road, nobody had seatbelts. And everyone was driving like crazy and then crashing and dying. So we got seatbelts. And it's, in a way, you could say the same with our mobile technology. We have to then learn techniques to maybe make it more safe or more sociable, for example.
The problem in Luxembourg, I see it's become more and more, not cheaper, how to say it's a difference.
Try it in German? Or
teurer, es wird ja immer teurer.
More expensive.
More expensive.
Yeah.
Is that maybe a solution to become more community? So
exactly, yeah. So there's, so for example, in London, there's a fantastic co-living community called The Collective. Rental in London is really expensive, and it's The Collective. They have 550 apartments in one block, and people have their own apartment, and it's 11 square meters only, which is tiny for one. Yeah, it's really small. But there are, I think, 550 of these apartments, but you have 10,000 square meters of shared spaces. So you have big kitchens you can use, you have a spa, you have a library, you have co-working spaces. So really all you have in your private space is your bed, tiny little bathroom, private bathroom, and a little tea, you know, kitchen to make tea. but everything else is external from your private space. And of course, it's not great for a family. It's for younger people who are starting their careers, or students, or singles who come to work in the city. And on average, these apartments are 20% cheaper than the normal rent in London for that. But at the same time, they have all these fantastic services. So you balance out, you know, it's a weighing up of smaller square meters privately, but you have all these other functions and services that are accessible. And I think for a lot of people who don't want to stay in one place for a long time, it's a good solution, because people are mobile. They want to change city, change jobs, and especially the younger generation who don't want, you see the trend, they don't want to invest in a house for life, you know, like our parents or grandparents did. Want to stay free, keep their money fluid, if you like.
I don't want to stay at my parents continuously, so I'm not. Ich bin nicht frei, also ich kann nicht für mich selbst sorgen. Ich muss ja immer abhängig, also die Unabhängigkeit brauchen.
Genau, ja.
And in Japan, they have also the same problems. They have this, especially this space problem. They also approach this new concept of living, so to share more.
Yeah, Japan's a whole other culture, really. I don't think you can compare it to I don't think the way they live in Japan is something that fits into our mentality. I think within Europe, there are a lot of ideas we can share, but as far as I understand, they live also in very tiny spaces, and they stay with their parents a long time until they're married. So it's a whole other, it's still in another phase, if you like.
Okay, I have no question.
Thanks.
Thank you for your presentation. It was interesting. I got a question regarding, personally, yourself, you're dealing a lot with those kind of new house types and the trends. Did you experience that those trends are more expensive for now the property developer, or is it, did they already found a way that it's the same price or even cheaper to build in those kind of terms, as you mentioned?
I think one thing that's happening is that governments are starting to help. So you get private-public partnerships. So I think that's where governments can intervene to encourage the building of these. The one I showed in Vienna, the vertical village, the individualistic community, that was a group of people who got together, and I think there were about 15 people, and they got together and decided to do this project, and then they found other people. So it was a kind of grassroots thing. But now they've won lots of prizes, so the government is starting to, in the city of Vienna, if they have a piece of land and people can put in their offers, they might give it to a building project for a good price if they know it's going to be good for the community and for that particular area. So I think we're starting to see these public-private partnerships which encourage it, and then in terms of financing, obviously there's more possibility, more potential. So I don't think they're more expensive, and certainly not for actually living in them, and that's the interesting thing, yeah. Starting to see them also, interestingly, there's a new one in England, older women's communities, so which sounds, but they have a range of women from 60 to 90, so women who don't want to live on their own, but want to live in a kind of community, but still have their own apartments. So, it's addressing the problem of the aging society, that we're living longer, but we want, because as we're living longer, we're staying younger. We don't want to just go into an old people's home. We want to still live in a community. So we're starting to see interesting concepts there too. Okay, well, if anyone has any questions ever, think of something, welcome to email me. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks.